Okay guys, get ready for a double feature review. Our first review will be for Control, out now for PS4, Xbox One, and Windows 10. It's not very good. On to our second and last review, Minoria, out now on Steam. In this game, we play as a nun on a mission to put a stop to witches making a stink up in a cathedral and doing sorcery type things to the princess and blasphemy and such other things. Let's dive into the all-important gameplay that you would be experiencing in this game. If you've played a bomb service game before, you'll find this rather familiar. Combat is focused largely on melee attacks, with some use of different magics in there. Along the way, you'll find replenishable items that you can recover at every save point, so you'll be good to use them as much as you see fit. Especially the healing items, because you're going to die in this game. A lot. Combat has you trying to hit enemies at strategic opportunities while also playing the defensive and doing plenty of rolling. If you get hit by enemies 2 or 3 times, you are dead. It's as simple as that. So be prepared to get acquainted with this screen plenty of times. Even more so if you choose to play with the keyboard, because I have to heavily recommend that you play this game with a controller. Even with a controller, I would get confused with the buttons while getting flustered in combat on occasion, but I tested out the keyboard controls and I can imagine this being significantly worse. Of course, as I've said, you will also have magic abilities you can use. There are passive magic abilities that will make play easier, such as raising your attack when your health is low, and there are active magic abilities that you have to activate, which can heal status effects or act as attacks. The passive abilities are a godsend. The abilities to cure status effects I found only to be needed to cure poison in one particular area of the game. In magic attacks, really not helpful at all, truth be told. Whenever I would give them a shot, their attack output was pitiful compared to your melee attacks, to the degree where there was hardly any point in using them at all. Not only are they not helpful, they also feel actively cumbersome to use. You have an item slot in the upper left of the screen, and you press a button to switch between what of 3 items is in the slot, and you press another button to use the item currently in the slot. But this one slot holds your status healing items, your attacks, and your ever so important health items, all in one slot. It was never worth it in the midst of combat to try to switch over to a magic attack from your healing item, because you desperately need to have your healing item on you at all times. In a game where you can find yourself dead in seconds. An easy fix for this would to have been having one slot for healing items and one slot for attack abilities. These would have then been delegated to both your left and right shoulder buttons. This would have worked out well, I feel. Though they currently have the right shoulder button delegated to talking to your other nun friend, which is a really cute feature, being able to have someone with you and hear their thoughts on what's going on in the story or what they think about the area you just stepped into. But it's not something that I need to bring up at a moment's notice, so I feel that button could have easily been delegated to the D-pad instead. A new feature from any other bomb service game is the ability to level up. This comes from, as one might assume, if you've ever played a video game in your entire life, defeating enemies. As this is a game that focuses heavily on action, I feel this was a smart move, making killing enemies more worthwhile. Otherwise, I'm sure a smarter tactic would have been to just dodge them all since they deal so much damage. This also makes it more comforting in a sense, because no matter what, if a part of the game is giving you too much trouble, you could always just grind to try to make it easier on yourself. That shouldn't be necessary for most players though. I only found grinding to be needed once, and that was for an optional portion of the game. While you do become stronger from leveling up, unless you're getting many levels at a time, it's hard to get a sense of how much stronger you are getting from these levels. You can see your stats and maybe try to follow the numbers as you level up, but they're tucked away inside of a menu that I doubt you'd look at much. It would have been more satisfying if you could see what's being improved as you level up, when you level up. Maybe having it say like plus 15 health, plus 2 attack, and so on below your hub. At least then you could get a sense of how you're improving your stats. Another thing I feel they should have added to help with this sense of progression would be to show what level the monsters you are fighting are at. When you get close to an enemy, their health bar and guard bar appear, so I feel a number showing off their level of strength could have easily been slapped on with that other stuff. There are some enemies that appear early in the game that are weak that later appear in a much more stronger but similar looking rendition, so it would have helped to gauge how much tougher they are before they end up killing you because you thought it was a weaker enemy from the beginning of the game, but it's really not. As you're fighting knights, witches, or things, you'll be exploring different areas, such as a jail or garden. These areas will have somewhat branching paths that will house different keys or items needed for progression. To add more incentive to explore and to sniff out possible secret areas and rooms, Bomb Service have made it so there are 40 hidden silver coins in the game to be found. You will need these coins to buy items from the game's shop, so if you want that ever useful sounding passive, you will need to keep yourself on your toes for secrets. An interesting thing to note is that there certainly seems to be more items to buy than there are coins, so you will have to spend wisely and really consider what you are buying into, which I appreciate but also find frustrating, because the shop doesn't tell you if an item you are about to buy is passive or active. I've had to go back to a previous save because what I bought wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be, and I did not want to spend my limited coins on an active ability I knew well I was not going to use. That feels like something that you could easily patch in, but I'm not a game designer, so I could very well be wrong. Though it's odd to not see a feature in the shop already, since this is something in the shop of Bomb Service's previous game. You won't be backtracking to areas too much, but it would have been a nice touch for them to have color-coded the map to different areas of the game, just to make you have an easier idea of what area you'd want to be backtracking to if you looked at the map and saw you had a piece of the map missing. Pausing briefly on the never-ending nitpicking, the gameplay itself is very satisfying. My absolute favorite part of the game is the flow of exploration. You're constantly on the move, always getting new rooms, getting to bosses, and fighting through enemies. There are rooms or bosses that might give you a little trouble, but there was always that driving push to want me to continue onward to try to see and explore more of the map. There being a rather forgiving number of checkpoints also keep you from losing too much progress, and keeps dying from getting too frustrating. While playing the game, I wanted to keep moving forward, to see more of this appealing yet dark world. The art style of the game was something I wasn't too sure about as I watched the game develop, but after having played it myself finally, the painted art style really grew on me. All of Bomb Service's previous games had been pixel art, and while they had truly done an amazing job on that front in the previous title, a change of art direction that also stands out in the indie market is very welcome. Since there's no short supply of pixel art indie games nowadays. There are a number of areas or rooms in this game that are genuinely beautiful. The mood of the art is consistently dark, and though you are a cute chibi-like nun, you are walking through rooms with blood staining the walls in a world where NPCs may beg and plead for you to kill them. It all makes for a convincing atmosphere to the world. The music also fits, as, aside from the boss music, you will be hearing nothing but subdued, melancholic compositions throughout your journey. The compositions, while by themselves may sound relaxing, make the world that much more grim and sad against the backdrop of cell walls and bloodied flags. Stories are not something I find particularly necessary in 2D platformers, and to be honest, they're not something I've found myself remembering much from Bomb Service's previous games. That being said, I do feel that Minoria acts as a good step up in this regard. It's nothing life-changing, but I found it satisfying in its direction. Overall, while I do have some nits to pick with this game, it is, in the end, a satisfying, fun 2D platformer. But I feel with a formula like this, that was to be expected. How could you go wrong with cute nuns plus exploration? It's like taking a red plumber and adding a green rideable dinosaur. The outcome will always be fun, because that's just simple math. Or you could say it's like how you add boring characters, plus a half-baked script with tone-deaf moments, plus repetitive gameplay, and that equals a massive disappointment. I mean, it's just simple, indisputable math at that point. But you know, judging by the game's Steam page, critics, or other YouTubers who have made videos on this game, I think I have something controversial to say. This game is not a Metroidvania. There are a few things that help define, for me, what a Metroidvania is. The first is that there are numerous interconnected areas. These areas would be connected by paths, secret rooms, warp rooms, or so on. It's not uncommon for you to either have the ability to or have to go through multiple areas before you're able to actually make real progress to the next boss or item. In Minoria, it's pretty segmented to where you explore one area, then you move on and unlock the next area which you explore, and then you unlock the next area you explore, and so on. The game doesn't try to juggle multiple areas at once for you to make progress. This isn't Castlevania Symphony of the Night where you go through 3 areas, get to the library, get an item, go to the complete opposite side of the castle, and then eventually go back to the library to get another item. You don't even gain the ability to warp between areas until after you've seen the credits. So the game really has you focusing on one area at a time. Another thing are upgrades in Metroidvanias. These items, which may range to new abilities, to transformations, and or weapon upgrades, help the player get around in the world. These would then allow the player to access new areas, or new sections from older areas. Minoria has this, but only to the most minuscule degree. You get 2 upgrades that are similar to what I'm describing, with extra jump height or a dash, though if anything, these upgrades are focused more on combat, like the second jump doubling as an extra slash. The dash upgrade you get has use for platforming, but you don't need to go back to old areas with this ability, and the only times you need this upgrade is for select rooms after you've already gotten the upgrade. Which leads into my third thing that I think helped define what a Metroidvania is, and that is backtracking. Overall, Metroid games have you going around a map, getting upgrades to help yourself progress through said map, maybe occasionally getting lost, and backtracking to old areas with a new lens now that you have acquired your various abilities. Minoria doesn't have backtracking other than one very brief example, but this one time isn't even relevant to the idea of turning around to go back to an old area yourself. For the sake of the main experience, you go through the areas in a linear fashion. You have a very limited number of upgrades you will receive, and you won't face the need to go back to old areas in order to progress forward. And in all honesty, not once did I ever feel lost in this game. I always knew where I had to go next and what I had to do. And you know what? That's okay! Because this game didn't try to be a Metroidvania. During its development, the developer never said it was a Metroidvania, and in fact always referred to it merely as a 2D action side-scroller. It's just that people are so quick to identify just about anything as a Metroidvania if it's 2D and has a map that's made out of squares. And like, I get it. It's easier to say Minoria is a Metroidvania with nuns compared to
Minoria is a 2D action side-scroller with explorative elements, melee-based combat with dodge rolling, and nuns.
But at the cost of convenience, you lose the identity of what the game actually is. Another indie game, Iconoclasts, also suffered from something similar, where everyone who talks about it crudely stuffs it inside the Metroidvania pigeonhole, even when, again, the developer himself hardly even identifies the game as a Metroidvania. But hey, at that point, let people call the game what they want. People just want something that's easy enough to throw around and understand. And boy, does this guy need all the attention he can get. He sacrificed just about his entire 20s just so he could single-handedly create his game, only for it to get barely any traction aside from a cult following. Possibly in part because Celeste came out 2 days later and everyone was talking about that game instead. Was all that time, effort, isolation, and depression worth it for him to create his game by himself? Probably not! And it's still something he's thinking about to this very day. What game was I talking about again? Minoria, despite what critics and many fans keep saying, is not a Metroidvania. And that's okay, because being one is not the art's intent. The art's intent is being a smooth, well-paced action platformer with some exploration. and in that, Minoria succeeds. But if it's got exploration, then how can it not be a Metroidvania? When a Metroidvania's got exploration! Minoria's exploration is largely confined into what single area you are in at the time. You will have a few branching pathways that many times will lead back into one another, and you may have some doors that you will have to return to a few rooms from with a key to unlock, but in this aspect the game is streamlined from what you would experience in any other sort of typical Metroidvania, which honestly felt rather refreshing. I adore Metroidvanias, but it can feel a bit exhausting whenever these games have the pacing slow to a crawl, making yourself pause for the map only to ask yourself, where do I go? Every few hours, only to then find out, oh, I had to grind a very particular enemy in this very particular area so that it might eventually drop a very particular item that's integral for me to make any new progress. Gee, wasn't that obvious? Glad I just spent over an hour of my life running around wondering how I can be missing something so simple. Still love you, Bloodstain. What game was I talking about again? The debate over what the term Metroidvania means, or if it's a term that we should be even using at all, is an ongoing discussion. In this game right here is the first time I'm starting to understand why that is. The only reason I bring this up at all is because this game can be easily interpreted as a Metroidvania just by glancing at it, or by what others are saying about it. But now that I'm talking about the game, I want to be very clear of what the game's intent is, as to avoid any misunderstanding. I wouldn't want someone to look at this game expecting a particular type of experience only to be disappointed after they realize what they got was far more streamlined than what they imagined. That all said, Minoria's way of circumventing any sort of frustrating fluff that may come with getting lost or constantly backtracking, while still being able to create a sense of engaging exploration, is something that I feel should be appreciated. The game's tight pacing is what made me want to keep playing without putting my controller down, making the runtime of 5 hours an absolute joy. 5 hours, though. Let's talk about that. I feel a point of contention some people may have for this game is the price, since it is so short but has an asking price of $20. And in a world where the global 1% is constantly trying to pollute the earth, so that in a few years' time they'll be able to sell clean air to us for premium, I completely understand wanting to save now so that you may have funds for those 5 extra puffs of crisp clean air when the end times arrive. But I'd also argue that in a market with small indie teams that spend years working on games, some of which being more creative or fun than their AAA counterparts, I believe that these people should be allowed more money for their product rather than that of a single trip to Taco Bell. After the initial 5 hours, I was able to go back for an extra hour of gameplay to get a few things I missed, and for a little post-game stuff. That still may seem a bit steep for $20, but allow me to bring up yet another argument. It's better to have a shorter, more focused game than a longer game with needless fluff. And with Minoria's pacing, I do not believe this game stuffs itself with fluff. I only have so many accessible hours to me between sleeping and going to my soul-destroying job, so I'd much rather have shorter games, personally. If you are interested in this game, and you feel you're comfortable with the price, I can recommend it for action platform enthusiasts. If you're interested but feel the price is a bit much for you, I can't really blame you. But I would then love to point you in the direction of the developer's previous works, most notably their game before Minoria, Momodora Reverie Under the Moonlight, or Momodora 4 for those that prefer to conserve breath. It's the game that's most similar to Minoria while also being more deserving of the moniker Metroidvania. It's about the same length, but is half the price. You'll also die slightly less, too. If Minoria is too much for your budget right now, but you still want to support the dev while also getting a really good game, I suggest that one. Maybe after playing that, you'll then feel more comfortable going for Minoria. If you do end up picking up both, though, please, again, keep in mind they're two games that may look similar, but have different intents in their level design. If I were forced to give Minoria an arbitrary number out of 10, it would be pretty dang good at 10. So that just wraps up the video, except I do want to go over two more things real quick, but they're both something that would be considered spoilers for those wanting to play the game, so feel free to click off now if you're not interested in hearing. So, spoilers in 3, 2, 1, and... Bosses in this game aren't particularly memorable, which is a shame since neat, challenging bosses have been a staple in the developers' previous games. Design-wise, they're not the most standout, and some of them are downright disappointing. The most disappointing ones being bosses that appear in the butt end of the game. This devil lady appears in promotional art of the game, so I was expecting to like her more than I did. I was assuming she was going to be a standout, memorable moment in the game. But she just appears out of nowhere and proceeds to be shockingly easy. Out of all the game's bosses, she was by far the easiest to dodge attacks from, as all I had to do was dodge roll, and I was pretty safe from danger. I got her down on my first try, which I can't say about the other bosses in the game. The White Dragon. It's a boss that the game teased by having a flyby dramatically occur earlier in the game, so it was one that I was looking forward to finally facing. But again, it was disappointing. I found his attacks to be too repetitive. This probably comes from the boss's design being rather restrictive in that its animations limit it in only moving left and right slightly. Their hitbox also extends way past their model, so I found myself targeting the air above them rather than them, which leads me to the final boss. A two-form boss that was very underwhelming because, again, their hitbox extends far above their model. Most of the damage I gave to the boss was attacking the air above them, which made things way too easy, which felt very anticlimactic. I would not call bosses this game's strong suit, which is saddening since there are bosses in Momodora 4 I still remember very well. The developer has mentioned his approach to designing bosses is very trial and error, so I just hope he'll learn from this. And one more thing, just so we don't end the video on a negative note, I'd really appreciate the aesthetic of the last area of the game being a beautiful forest. What would normally be a typical opener to an adventure, such as how it was in Momodora 4, acts as a nice contrast as the rest of the game had been so dark and dreary in more enclosed areas before this. Okay, that's all. Thank you. Good night.